12 hours. From sunset to sunrise, every criminal act becomes entirely legal. Emergency services stand down, and the rule of law simply vanishes. The philosophical justification for this nightmare usually points back to the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes. In his 1651 book Leviathan, Hobbes argued that without a sovereign authority to enforce the rules, humanity defaults to a violent, solitary war of all against all. According to this theory, a sanctioned night of crime acts as a necessary pressure valve. It gives the public a highly contained window to release their primal urges, supposedly ensuring peace for the rest of the year. The imagery of widespread street violence makes for compelling fiction, but historical precedents and disaster sociology point to a different outcome. The mainstream narrative of random neighborhood conflict masks a far more systemic threat. When institutions collapse in the real world, human beings rarely turn on each other. During massive crises like the 1906 San Francisco earthquake or the 1985 Mexico City earthquake, populations overwhelmingly engage in spontaneous mutual aid. The sudden suspension of state policing and capitalist market dynamics usually triggers what sociologists call disaster communism. Communities instinctively repurpose existing infrastructure and prioritize collective survival and basic human needs over violent competition. A legislated absence of law removes the state's monopoly on regulatory authority, creating a window for large-scale economic maneuvers that are normally blocked by the rule of law. Corporate architecture and private security forces mobilize in the shadows, utilizing the chaos as a cover for an aggressive, top-down transfer of wealth. This chart shows market liquidity the moment regulatory oversight is suspended. Algorithms instantly execute risk-free trades, draining billions offshore. With the Computer Fraud Act void, corporations switch to digital warfare. Wiper malware permanently deletes rival companies' cloud storage and ledgers. While the cyber attacks unfold, physical assets are secured by the private security sector. Wealthy individuals and elite corporations utilize heavily armed mercenary contractors to lock down valuable property, effectively transforming their estates into sovereign microstates with lethal force authorization. By the time the first physical window is broken on a city street, the most catastrophic damage has already been done. Massive amounts of capital and intellectual property are stolen entirely out of public view. Physical violence eventually does break out, but it doesn't manifest as random chaos. Historically, mass civil unrest clusters heavily around existing societal fault lines, like labor disputes, severe wealth disparities, and racial tensions. We have a natural empirical test. When the Montreal police went on strike for 16 hours in 1969, the resulting violence was highly targeted. The most intense destruction occurred when an angry taxi drivers' union exploited the absence of law enforcement to attack a rival limousine company's lucrative airport monopoly. The localized chaos in the streets provides perfect cover for a much larger structural attack. Domestic saboteurs and hostile foreign intelligence agencies use the distraction to execute coordinated physical and cyber strikes against the nation's highly vulnerable power grid. The ensuing loss of electrical power triggers a cascading failure across all other critical sectors. Without power for complex defense or communication systems, fire and emergency medical dispatch centers are forced into strict abandoned station protocols, leaving the public entirely cut off from 911 services. Deliberately paralyzing these emergency services ensures that the targeted violence escalates rapidly. Without fire departments available to respond to arson, urban fires spread unchecked, methodically ravaging working-class neighborhoods that lack the resources for private security. Inside the city's powerless hospitals, the situation devolves into a desperate ethical crisis. Facilities face an overwhelming surge in trauma cases while operating entirely without electricity, running water, or functional sanitation. The harrowing reality of Memorial Medical Center following Hurricane Katrina in 2005 gives us a precedent for this exact breakdown. Marooned by floodwaters and severely delayed rescue operations, medical staff were forced into unimaginable ad hoc triage. With backup generators failing and evacuation physically impossible for elderly patients on life support, doctors had to make an agonizing calculation. Faced with abandoning patients to die slowly in horrific conditions, physicians administered lethal doses of morphine to those who could not be saved. The state's deliberate failure outsources the ultimate moral trauma of societal collapse onto defenseless frontline healthcare workers. At the 12th hour, the window officially closes, and the rule of law abruptly snaps back into effect over a smoking, severely damaged society. This diagram highlights the intractable legal paradox of a continuous crime. If an individual is kidnapped at hour 11 of the lawless period, but the captivity extends into hour 13th, the act instantly transitions from a legally protected action into a prosecutable felony. Furthermore, the legislation guaranteeing amnesty for the night's events would immediately face international scrutiny. The United Nations and international human rights courts consistently rule that domestic amnesties cannot excuse gross human rights violations or crimes against humanity. The assumption that a nation can return to normal operations the following morning is a deliberate legal fiction. The complex boundaries of malicious cyber payloads deployed during the window, combined with international tribunal interventions, guarantee years of intractable judicial warfare. Even for standard domestic crimes pursued immediately after the deadline, the criminal justice system would collapse. Prosecutors bound by strict discovery laws would find it physically impossible processing millions of hours of footage and complex cyber forensics within mandated time limits, ultimately forcing the mass dismissal of cases. Meanwhile, small and medium-sized businesses face absolute financial ruin. Facing total insolvency from massive property damage, global insurers would aggressively invoke strike, riot, and civil commotion exclusions to systematically deny claims. Without insurance payouts to fund reconstruction, urban centers experience extreme real estate devaluation. Untouched elite conglomerates are then perfectly positioned to purchase massive amounts of distressed, uninsured commercial and residential property for pennies on the dollar. This 12-hour window functions as a mechanism to traumatize the working class and irreversibly consolidate global power.